Good afternoon. It's just after 1 o'clock and welcome back to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. And the first thing we're going to say straight away is Happy New Year. And thank you for all the support that has come in to us over the Christmas break. We know that quite a few of our viewers and listeners were quite desperate that we weren't going to be transmitting, but here we are back. So I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, with me, Mike Robinson. And, 6th January 2014, we think that this is going to be a very, very important year as the truth about what's happening in UK and the rest of the world starts to surface. And we've got to see the problem before we can start fixing things. So this year, we think, is going to prove to be a pivotal year. Just about got that out. Now, first of all, we're going to say that the weather here in Plymouth, variable. We've had lashings of rain over the holidays last night, horrific gale. And of course, many people throughout the country have been suffering. So we're going to say we're thinking of you. I think we've got a slide here of flooding in other parts of the country.
Well, I mean, this is the Guardian here saying that the UK, these storms are the worst in 20 years and more on the way. And strangely enough, the United States suffering from extremely cold weather at the moment, also the worst in 20 years. But the key thing is here, it's not the worst in 200 years, it's not the worst in 2,000 years, it's only the worst in 20 years. So what is different? Because we weren't experiencing these problems 20 years ago. What has changed? And of course, the economic collapse is what has changed. And you got to say, why are the flood defences not dealing with the problem? Why are our roads flooded? Well, they're flooded because our flood defences aren't being maintained properly. They're flooded because
we're building on floodplains.
We're building on floodplains, but we're also not cleaning out the drains and so on. And so drains are just building up with dendritis from year to year. And this is the result. And of course, King David can stand up and say how great it is that they're spending more money than ever on flood defences, but in the meantime, they're firing all the people from the Environment Agency that are actually responsible for managing Britain's flood defences. And we've also got this movement in agriculture, which is saying drainage systems change, and so this is really infrastructure collapse that we're looking at here. This isn't the result of unusual weather.
Yeah.
It's infrastructure collapse.
Well, we're going to say the way we look at it, we can see that people are suffering as a result of the failure of our own government. And as we get deeper into today's news, we're going to see more of just what we're dealing with. And you've got quite a few bits here on the economy.
Well, this was George Osborne giving a speech. In case you can't see him, we'll just blow him up a bit there. There he is, looking particularly plump, perhaps from the Christmas holidays, maybe?
Well, maybe that. It was his hair, I noticed. It's looking particularly dark, I think. I wonder whether he's been doing a little bit of dyeing of his hair.
Possibly a transplant there, who knows? But anyway, 2014 apparently is the year of hard truths, he says. Well, I disagree. I think it's going to be the year of the Bradbury Pound. We'll come back to that in a bit. So there he is. You would imagine, would you not, that since he's giving a speech about the prospects for Britain's economy, he'd choose some really impressive example of Britain's economic might as a venue. Perhaps some kind of high-tech research and development facility, which is going to be feeding into providing employment for tens of thousands of jobs. Well, actually, he went here to Cirtec, who bend some aluminium for cars parts. Now, I'm not really criticising Cirtec because I'm sure they do a very good job, but this is hardly the bastion of British industry, and so a bit disappointing that he couldn't find a better location. Maybe we don't have one.
Well, he's not going to find shipbuilding, is he, or
aircraft
heavy engineering?
Building, the only thing we build now in terms of heavy engineering is arms and munitions, it seems. But anyway, so what was he talking about? Well, here's what he was saying. We're going to cut the deficit, apparently. We're going to reduce taxes for hard-working people. We're going to create more jobs by backing business. We're going to cap immigration and welfare. And it's really the welfare one that's the important one there. And we're going to deliver the best schools and skills. So what does this mean? In reality, it means more austerity, £25 billion over the 2 years, 2017 and 2018. It's quite interesting that he's presenting this information because we don't know who's going to be in the next Parliament. and my understanding was that no Parliament could bind its successor. But this demonstrates how policy moves from one government to the next, no matter who is actually
no matter what the colour, the agenda just continues.
The agenda continues. So he said that this figure of £25 billion is based on current forecasts and assumptions. And in order to maintain the pace of what he's calling departmental spending reductions, there would need to be a further £12 billion of welfare savings. So £12 billion of welfare savings, that's pretty staggering. And he finished his speech by saying, let's finish the job. Well, let's finish what job? The job he's talking about, of course, is the destruction of living standards, education, healthcare, and so on. And really what we're talking about is the destruction of the country. In the meantime, the propaganda that everything is fine and dandy continues to be pumped out in the form of two surveys today. So here we've got the first one from Market crowing about strong service sector growth would be due. And we've also got, who was this? This was the Lloyds Commercial Banking, also pushing out a survey saying that employers are so confident about the future that they're hiring people again. But as we've said, in the meantime, Osborne continues to feed off the backs of those least able to afford it. And we continue to see the war drums beating because, of course, this is the centenary of World War I, and the propaganda around that is beginning to ramp up. And here we've got Ambrose Evans Pritchard from a few days ago, drawing parallels between the current economic and geopolitical situation with that of 1914. He's saying that today we're actually on a quasi-war footing. He's pointing out the major hotspots in the world, China and Japan being one. They're in a currency war with devaluations on both sides of that currency war. We've got the Middle East, and he's suggesting that the war between the Sunni and Shiite Muslims mirrors the 30 Years' War in the Middle Ages. And he's talking about the massive increase in aerospace and defence industries being indicative of pre-war climate. And he's also really pointing out that the similarities between today and 1914 are stark. And this is really what we've been hinting at for quite a number of months now. We're saying that really we have this option between development and using the Bradbury Pound to actually rebuild the country, or seeing ourselves brought into another war.
Produce something productive, create something, or we go down the destructive path which our politicians are so good at, which we'll be coming on to.
Exactly. In the meantime, of course, the banks are fighting like crazy. I posted an article on the website, on the UK Column website just before Christmas, talking about the British banking reforms and how the banks, that there's a whole swathe of secondary legislation to come in behind the Major Banking Reform Act, and that the banks are lobbying like crazy to see that secondary legislation really take the teeth out of the Banking Reform Act. And here we've got the Eurozone has decided that banking separation is also something that it doesn't want, even though it's the only thing which is going to provide any kind of solution. I said in a newsletter that I sent to our subscribers last night that this policy of quantitative easing and austerity, it represents a sort of backward looking. We've borrowed money, or we're in debt to somebody, and we've got to pay that back. And it doesn't matter how many people have to die in the process of paying that back through failing healthcare, failing economy, failing education and so on. Those debts have to be paid, even though those debts have really been built up on the basis of fraud and corruption. Then we've got the idea of national credit and the Bradbury Pound, and that's based on the idea of a debt that we owe to the future, actually, because we didn't, or our children and our grandchildren don't get the option of whether they're going to be born or not, and it's really up to us to make sure that they are left with a legacy that they can live with.
Not born into debt being being the most critical one.
Exactly. So this banking separation, really key part of that. But this is the centenary year of the Bradbury Pound, along with World War I. let's make sure that the Bradbury Pound is a centenary that that people remember 2014 for, and not World War One, despite the efforts of King David and his cronies
and his team. Yeah. Well, as always, excuse me, we're going to say the Bradbury Pound represents, we believe, the best attack really on the control of the mainstream banks and this debt economy. We don't need to prove the Bradbury Pound. It's proved itself. It's been in existence. All we need to do is reinstate the Bradbury Pound so that we've got Britain as a nation state reissuing its own currency as credit, and we can then start to take apart this criminal system very quickly. So if you're not yet aware of the Bradbury Pound, I hope you have a look on the website. You can download the ebook, which gives you background into it. And also we had a quick telephone call earlier this morning to say that there was some discussion about money on the BBC's website, and to the amazement of our caller, a comment promoting the Bradbury Pound had not been edited out by the BBC. So either their web team were not doing their job today, or perhaps even some people in the BBC are beginning to think about what we're being told about banks and the economy. We will see. Well, we believe that the plan is to break up Britain. Of course, this fits the model for the European Union, where Scotland and Wales are to be regional countries within the European Union, whereas England is to be divided up into 9 separate regions. And of course, they're going flat out at the moment to see if they can get Scotland to break away. I just love this as another twisted headline. Sorry, just leave it there for a second, Mike. We've got 30% back Scottish independence as referendum phony war ends. But what they're actually saying, or what the figures are really saying, is that 61% of Scots want to remain part of the UK. So we're not seeing the mainstream press pushing out the truth that the majority of people in UK want to keep what has been a very successful partnership going. No, we're going to keep pushing out the agenda, which of course Alex Salmond and his crew have been pumping millions of pounds in north of the border to see whether we can engineer the breakup of UK. And if you're going to go down that route, what are you going to need? Well, of course, you're going to need votes to vote for Scottish so-called independence as a region in the EU. And therefore, that automatically means that if you can lower the voting age, which Alex Salmond's been pushing very hard for, you're likely to get youngsters who can't work out what's really going on. They're going to vote as they're guided, as they're nudged by the establishment. And the other thing, of course, is you want lots of new faces in Scotland, people who haven't absorbed the culture and history of Scotland. So Alex Salmond opening the door to newcomers, and we're going to be talking about the hot topic of immigration, and we're not going to be squeamish about doing it. But what's the press more interested in? Well, some of them, the Express here, they're getting, some people are getting very upset because Prince William is going to go to Cambridge University. He hasn't really got enough A levels, but they're setting up a special course over 10 weeks, so he's going to learn about farming. I think it's farming anyway. And some of the naughty students have said it would be a good scam if they could get people all around the city photographing him in case he gets up to anything naughty. And this has been picked up, of course, by the police. And, oh dear, there's a risk of harassment of His Royal Highness. Well, OK, we'll keep an open mind over that. But we have been saying now over several years that if the state can possibly do it, it wants to suppress any free comment or reporting, and presumably that includes university students. Meanwhile, in the legal field, we've got trouble brewing. There hasn't been a lot of reporting over this, but there is unease growing quite rapidly amongst our barristers and solicitors. over the fact that legal aid fees have been cut. And of course, legal aid is the gravy train that allows these law firms to absolutely feed off the state. So if we take family courts, for instance, the longer you can draw out the issue of that case, the more money they can make. And our calculation of several years ago was the minimum turnover of money just as a result of family law cases was a minimum of £20 billion. Now the government's talking about cutting it, and out of the woodwork all of our best legal beagles have come forward, and they're very unhappy. So they've got a Justice Alliance. Have a look at this website, very interesting because it's got Unite, obviously a massive politically controlled union. You've got Liberty, remember formerly the National Civil Council for Liberty, which was promoting pro-paedophile agenda. We've got the Howard League for Penal Reform, Children's Society, that's an interesting little one popping up in there, and many others. So just have a look and see what they're talking about. But this was one sentence in the Guardian article, two sentences, sorry. Lawyers have been careful to avoid describing the action as a strike because that would raise questions about contractual obligations to the legal aid agencies. But criminal barristers say the protest reflects mounting resentment over successive reductions in legal aid fees. Now, I'm going to say live, I'm not too sure what this contractual obligation is, but if there's anybody out there who's well informed, I think what it's really talking about is the fact that we have exactly that. We don't have free, open and honest law. What we've got is people working within contractual arrangements of which legal aid forms part of it. And previously we have seen a memorandum of understanding between the Family Law Division and CAFCASS, which would mean that of course CAFCASS cannot possibly be independent when it appears inside a family law court. But there was CAFCASS is supposed to be the independent representation for the child. For the child. But they had a signed memorandum of understanding with the Family Law Division. So quite how that meant they were still independent, I don't know. But that's the way the law works. If we just return to that slide, we've put up a featured comment here from a gentleman called Paul Wesson. So this was selected by the Guardian. And if you want to read that comment, which has been posted, it's full of glowing praise for our barristers and solicitors. And it says, of course, how they struggle to get by on the money available to them. That's apart from the top earning barristers, of course, who earn a minimum of £500,000 a year. But don't we all, really? Well, while the legal team are up to that, the Mirror here picking up on something a bit more down to earth. Iranian drug kingpin Mahmoud Kourangi avoids deportation as it would breach his human rights. So we're just flagging this up to show that at the moment we've got this increasing turbulence. People simply don't know what's going on, whether it's in the legal world or elsewhere. And this is part of the agenda to destabilise UK. The church is involved, and the Mail here picking up on the fact that the Church of England has decided to rewrite the baptism ceremony in order to take out too much use of the word sin. And we don't want to be rejecting the devil. So we've posted a little comment there at the bottom of the picture on your screen. But of course, the devil is a master of deception and appears in many forms. Possibly we've got a picture of him there, I don't know. But personally, I always worry when we're removing an invitation for people to come onto the side of honesty and truth. And if you sin a bit, it doesn't really matter. This seems to be how our politicians get away with it. And this is the type of thing that goes hand in hand with the church failing. So the Mail flagging up again a very tragic story of a Christian couple who were banned from seeing their grandchildren And although there were various promises made by social services in this case, they've only seen them, I think it's once in 2 years, and they have no regular access. Of course, although the rules for social services say that priority should be given to other family members. So we're going to flag up once again that social services are backed by the police and secret courts, and they're now stealing children at will. And surprise, surprise, we're not really seeing any effective criticism or exposure of that from the Church of England. Are we surprised? No. I don't think so. So let's have a look deeper into what's going on in politics. And this was a headline that caught our eye very quickly. NHS hospitals serve 69 pence meals to patients as spending is cut. Now, of course, Mike's been talking about George Osborne, the man who likes the lavish dinners up in the city. So we're reducing the amount of money to pay for meals in hospitals, but we've got plenty of money for building Britain's biggest prison. So Chris Grayling here, happy to promote a super prison, which I think is going to take about 2,000 inmates, and it's going to be surrounded by smaller so-called satellite prisons. And what is this about? Well, we've really got to think about who we've got governing the country at the moment, whether we can trust these people. But here we've got the true priorities of the Lib Con party. Priority on prisons, banging people up, not rehabilitation, versus we can't afford to pay people.
I wonder how much the meals will cost in the prison. I'm pretty sure G4S is going to be getting more than 69p per meal.
Well, you mentioned them, so we better bring up the next article. Here they are, G4S. And of course, there's been a massive punch up at what's described here in the Mirror as the controversial Oakwood prison. This is due to the fact that they've had a lot of violence, suicide attempts and trouble in this unit. But it got so bad in the last few days that they had to call in riot police in order to put pay to the trouble. So we've got a private company that when it can't do its job, it calls in the public sector. The police have to take the brunt of the problem. And who pays for it? Well, of course, that's going to be the taxpayer. So this is what the Tories are really about. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's all right because they've solved their internal problems, which caused that small fraud issue just before Christmas.
Okay.
So G4S can go ahead and
get another contract.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is what David Cameron is really about, of course, is giving the country and our public infrastructure to his chums. But we're going to get deeper in. Here's the hot topic. So we've got a former foreign minister from Bulgaria who's been criticising us, if I'm allowed to say that, because he says that if we dare to comment on immigration from Bulgaria, we've got to be far right. So we thought we'd have a little dig into the reality of what's going on. So the Independent here, picking up the story, of course, a lot of people very concerned about how many more people will come into the country. So Bucharest to London on the bus with the Romanians taking the 52-hour ride in search of a new life in Britain. What UK Column has said repeatedly, and we're going to keep on saying it, is did these people fight their way ashore? Did any of Britain's immigrant population fight their way ashore? Well, the answer to that is no. So where's the problem come from? We should be focused on our own politicians. Because these are the people that are telling us one thing and doing something else. But the aim is to ramp up trouble, and here we can see it coming very nicely with this Mirror article where it's talking about a landlord. I think with his wife he owns 1,000 properties, so he's doing quite nicely, but he said that he's going to start evicting British families who are on benefits because they're very poor payers. And he's going to make room for Eastern European migrants. So what we got here is basically creating the problem, and then we're going to ramp up the media to get everyone at each other's throats. Meanwhile, the real troublemakers are still sitting there in Westminster. It's pretty blatant once you start looking for it, I think. and cynical.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, here we are then, BBC. We can't get away without a little bit of a look at the BBC. But according to the Express, the BBC has said that it's made a terrible mistake over its failure to report on people's concerns to do with immigration. And Nick Robinson here, one of their key men, has said it's terrible that Auntie has been so bad at reporting. Mark Thompson said, well, we were very reticent about talking about immigration because we might be playing into a political agenda. I've paused there, Mike, because what do you say? What do you say to a man who says this? So we've got the national broadcaster who's supposed to be broadcasting in an unbiased way on all serious subjects, but he decides, I'm not going to talk about this because it could be political.
Do you want to know what I think?
As long as there's no bad language.
Well, I'll be careful then, but basically the BBC has stayed silent on this issue until the issue is big enough that they can then start ramping up the angst and the anger
and the trouble
and then they say, oh well, we were worried about a political motive, so well, we'll see what happens and see how they behave in the next 6 months, shall we?
Well, it'll be interesting to watch. This is a bit more of the comment. Excuse me. It says last July a report commissioned by the BBC Trust, a very reliable body of course, found that there was a deep liberal bias, and that was why they'd failed to accurately to reflect public concern about immigration and the EU. But the final sentence there says, no problem. Basically, we made a terrible mistake, but it's all okay. Well, apart from Jimmy Savile, fraud, corruption, missing public money, violence, sex, death, and lies about the politics in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. So, I mean, unless somebody deals with the BBC, and that's got to be us, the general public, we're in dire straits, really. What do the BBC prefer to do? Well, thanks to the Mirror, this has also been picked up, but they're pointing out that since EastEnders has been running, they've managed to have 100 deaths, most of which are not natural causes, as the Mirror said. So here's the BBC pumping out death, violence and generally depressing stuff to the British population and those foolish enough to watch it.
It's interesting. My sister was commenting on EastEnders over the Christmas holidays.
Right.
She said, I used to watch the programme, but after a while I discovered I was getting stressed just watching the programme. I was feeling more stressed after the end, so I stopped watching it. So,
well, that's a pretty honest statement, isn't it? So there you have it. That's what the BBC prefers to do, but underneath the surface, this is the issue which is going on. So let's have a look at how this fits in with the government. Benefit Street, so we've now got articles, 9 out of 10 households are on welfare, and this is what they describe as people broken Britain. Here we are, broken Britain, and our comment is, if Britain is broken, who broke it? And maybe we can ask some questions. Did we do it? Did our listeners and viewers do it? Did our children do it? Our parents? Was it the immigrants? It's got to be our politicians because they've been running the country. But it's nice. Well, it's nice to see so easily here that basically we've got the ramping up of trouble. If you're on benefits, you're some sort of vermin who the state can't function. This is moving us towards what the Nazi Party got up to. So here's David Cameron. He was on TV being interviewed. I've forgotten the interviewer's name.
Andrew Marr.
Andrew Marr, thank you very much for that. So what's he saying? Well, he's going to charge migrants to use the NHS. Is this reality? This is another promise. We're saying it's another false promise by King David. He thinks he can now start to pick up votes. And what's this doing? Migrants are coming over here and using our NHS for free. So this is designed, in my opinion, to get people angry with the migrants when they should be getting angry with the lying toad that's King David. We've got a bit more here. New bid to stop 55 million a year going overseas for migrants' children. So we've got migrant. But of course, the man here in the firing line is David Cameron. He's making clear his outrage at the system.
I mean, £55 million is a significant amount of money, but it's being presented here as something really massive.
Vast, yeah.
Right, we're sitting here with £1 trillion of debt, the government, and we're worried about £55 million. I'm not saying it shouldn't be dealt with, but in the greater scheme of things, it's not that significant.
Yeah. So he says here he's making clear his outrage at the system, and he's warned that he could not strike a deal. If he cannot strike a deal with other EU countries, he'll seek to secure the change in his membership renegotiations. So what this man is really saying is that having treasonously given power over the UK to the EU, he's now admitting that our own government is no longer in control. So this man is admitting the treason of obviously the Labour administration, but he's continuing it. And it's in front of our eyes when we look at the evidence he's telling us.
It wasn't the Labour administration took us in the first place, of course.
It was not. That's true. But we know where they've all been going. So sticking with King David, he's making another pledge here. State pensions will rise by £20 a week in 2020. I don't know what £20 is going to be worth in 6 years' time, but he's very excited about it. You can see the smirk there. We say another false promise.
Yes, because so we've got a £4.5 trillion black hole in the state pension pot, but he's going to provide another £20 a week. Perhaps this explains something about the £25 billion that has to be removed from government spending in the next 2 years.
Yeah, well, he's getting worried about the election. We should be getting very excited about the election because we've got the opportunity to actually take these people on properly. But it goes on, turmoil over OAP benefits. He's going to defy the cabinet. This is absolute nonsense. Has the Mail done any research about what these guys? Another false promise by King David. And then this one, I think, took the biscuit because this was quite a widely broadcast article which was about the right to buy. And he went and visited a very attractive blonde lady, if I may say so. So he's happy there on the sofa with her. And it's emerged, well, she isn't sort of bottom end of the spectrum. She's driving a £33,000 BMW and working with an estate agents that helped lever her into this. So the comment, there's been a lot of comment on the internet about this. And of course, David Cameron absolutely milking the thing as though he is actually achieving some policy. What people are saying on the web at the moment is that this whole thing was set up. Another web of lies, basically.
They wouldn't do that, would they?
I'm afraid so. I think they are. Well, it gets better, though. We're going to give the prize, I think, today, at least, to Quentin Letts, because he produced this article where he said, Captain Cameron, bossy as a slave driver on a Roman galley. Now, we think maybe he's picking up on King David. The correct address for Cameron is King David, but he's chosen to make him Captain Cameron. But he was picking up on some interesting stuff. And part of it was, do you see the steely posture here with the jaw pushed forward? I'm your trusted leader.
And I'm concentrating very hard on what you're saying, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Letts picked up on this. So he said, Mr. Cameron leaned forward in the studio chair toward old Ma, both hands on his right knee, his upper lip all pumped with determination. And I think we can see that. It's pretty impressive stuff. And then he said, he got very energetic, insistent, emphatic. His eyes were bulging, and he said it was just incredible to watch. So he got on to say he was a human dynamo, an inescapable fizzer, powder keg MP, and he kept telling us what was what and why and how it was going to be tough. So somebody had been talking to Cameron over Christmas. He said, was it the Snow Queen? Was it Samantha? But apparently not. But when it all came down to it, here's Osborne's comment, isn't it? The job's not yet done.
Yeah.
It's not even half completed. They've only half destroyed the country, but we're going to jolly well keep going so that our efforts are not wasted. These people are despicable. It's a bit tough, isn't it, coming straight back to this. This was the last bit. his voice went up and up, and then he let it slip out of the bag. If he was Prime Minister in 2017, this, and if he was Prime Minister in 2017, that. So if you're sitting there in your chairs thinking, what can we do about these people? We've got to get them out of Parliament. We don't need parties. The problem is the party system where everybody is slavishly following the leader. We need to get some decent, honest men and women into Westminster. And personally, if they're truthful and honest, I don't particularly mind where they come from. I'm sure they can do a better job of the country, governing the country, than this lot. But there's some very devious politics going on, which the Telegraph has picked up on. We've got a plan. We've got a Conservative campaigner, Toby Young, putting forward a plan for a UKIP vote swap. And what they're saying is we've got to work together to keep Ed Miliband out of Parliament. So he's become the bogeyman, and we're going to say, well, OK, this is the subversive Marxist that we can actually see. But of course, the real danger is this man, because it is Cameron who is pushing a Linsky big society policy. That is Marxist policy. But people can't see this man because he wears a slightly different grey suit and he puts on his nice tie, and the Blue Rinse Brigade think that he's a lovely Tory. But check it for yourself. Don't believe us. If you're looking at a Linsky, you are looking at Marxist doctrine, and that is now embedded into the Conservative manifesto. Overseas, it doesn't get much better, and of course we've got terrible things now starting to happen in Iraq. So we've got Al-Qaeda now able to take over cities, and of course other elements in Iraq are busy saying that they're going to fight in order to try and regain these cities. So we've got Iraq ripped apart as a result of the British and American invasion. We've got amazing carnage going on. And of course, Al-Qaeda, which we were told was a very dangerous organisation, has clearly been allowed to feed on this. So that probably would bring us to this man. I'm sorry, I should have put this as a Guardian article. Tony Blair, businesses amass 13 million cash after a surge in profits. What's he really talking about? Well, I think it's death. You can make a lot of dosh on the back of death, and have a look at the figures yourself. Well, these were the figures that he was trying to hold up. We just thought we'd put in there some of the Iraqi civilian death figures, never mind the military. But this is what Tony Blair and his colleagues are capable of doing. And of course, they know if they do the job for the bankers, they earn the money. The Guardian was also able to pick up on the drug trade, and I put this in specially for you, Mike, because here it is. They're now saying that, yes, there's a bumper opium year, a £1 billion harvest, and they're worried that Afghanistan is going to fragment into a criminal state.
It's already a criminal state.
Due to our efforts.
Indeed.
We've done a particularly good job at turning it into a criminal state. And of course, we've shown the figures when the Taliban were in control, never mind what problems that produced, but one of the things it didn't produce was an opium crop. So quite clearly, the banks needed the Taliban out as soon as possible. We've not only the trouble in Iraq, but we've also got the continuing trouble in Syria. And we're now seeing more and more the references to Al-Qaeda, who happen to be the very militants that have been encouraged and supported by both President Obama and Cameron himself, I think.
Well, it seems to be still pretty vague about exactly who's doing the fighting, but it's pretty clear that the Syrian so-called opposition has completely fragmented. And they're fighting more amongst themselves at the moment than they are against the Assad regime. Mm-hmm. So the situation in Syria just continues to degrade on a daily basis.
Yeah,
and more and more chaos.
I'll add to that we are still receiving casualty figures, which we are going to be presenting to you. But at the moment, the civilian casualties in Syria are running at a minimum of 80 people a day. This, of course, is something which is not coming out in the mainstream news anymore. because the excitement of a missile strike has gone. But we will bring you up to date. Now, we don't want to finish our news and comment on the politics in Britain today without bringing up the illustrious name of Mr. Clegg. And once again, the Mirror doing very well here, because they're pointing out the sheer hypocrisy that a company, Autofill Worldwide Limited in Nottinghamshire, pledged £30,000 donation to help with the forthcoming election. And 4 days later, Clegg, like a rat up a drain pipe, is there visiting the factory. But they say there was no connection between the donation and the visit. It's worth reading the article, actually. We'd just like to say, by their fruits ye shall know them. These people are hypocrites, they're liars, they're devious politicians, and we've got to get rid of them. And we just emphasise this by the fact that if we look back in history, of course, the best traitors have been the best dressed traitors. So if you're looking for who's really going to do the damage to the country, it's not going to be somebody at the bottom of the pile giving away a few simple military secrets. The people who are going to do the real damage are the people who are buried at the top of the establishment and in the political establishment.
This is why I'm sticking with my jumpers.
Okay, there's no answer to that one. All right, well, we're going to end on a piece of what we think is very good news. And we were called this morning to be told that a councillor, Mr. Steve Hunt of Seven Sisters and leader of the independent group of councillors on Neath Port Talbot County Borough Council, has publicly declared his support for the Justice for Linda Lewis campaign. And he's made a statement, which I'll very quickly read, for immediate release, Justice for Linda Lewis campaign. After careful scrutiny of the evidence, which includes the letter dated the 5th of December 2013, sent to Mr. David Rees, Assembly Minister, from Mr. David Michael, Head of Legal Services at Neath Port Talbot County Borough Council, I am 100% convinced that the local authority, of which I am an elected councillor for Seven Sisters, have to answer very serious questions on whether they did indeed act both illegally and unlawfully in removing the 12-year-old daughter of Linda Lewis from her sick children's bed in Florida in 1998 without any valid legal or lawful authority. I wish to make it clear that I also agree with the conclusion reached by the UK column of the 20th of December 2013. And if again the evidence presented is proven, then this is indeed a clear case of kidnapping and trafficking of a minor. I also believe that if Neath Port Talbot County Borough Council did deliberately mislead the courts in the past in order to obtain an injunction to cover up the actions of agents of Neath Port Talbot Social Services, then these very agents or officers should be brought to justice. Councillor Steve Hunt. Well, we'd like to say thank you very much, Mr. Hunt, for taking the trouble to support Linda and Kevin and have a look at the evidence. And this really is a fine example of what we need in 2014, which is the good men and women to stand up for what is right within their organisations. So if you're there as a troubled teacher or doctor or nurse or policeman or woman, and you want to know what to do, you've got to stand up and be counted. You've got to say, no, we're not having criminal acts, we're not having the wrong action, we need the right action. So somebody who's been doing a very fine job pointing out the dangers of fracking, Ian Crane, and we'll have Ian on tonight, I believe.
9 p.m. tonight, fracking nightmare. More from Barton Moss. He drove down to Devon yesterday in the pouring rain, and he will be in the studio. So any questions, get them in the chat box as usual.
And I can say that Ian reported to us this morning that there's been a steady sort of escalation in events in the fracking camp. I believe that some of the lady protectors, as they call themselves, have cemented themselves in to prevent themselves being moved by the police. But also there's now been some fictional accusation by persons unknown that people have tried to fire flares at the police helicopter, of which the people on site say this is absolute nonsense. But the police have used this as an opportunity for a raid and search of all the property and belongings inside the tents.
They're doing their best to incite some kind of trouble. Yeah.
And this is the view from people on the ground, that although there are clearly police men and women there who are policing properly, somebody behind the scenes, chief constable perhaps, seems hell-bent on winding up the trouble. Well, that brings us to the end of...
Before we go, there are two questions in the chat box.
Okay.
When's Malcolm going to be back on? Is the first one. The answer is unlikely. He's going to be back on in the short term. Malcolm's working hard on a number of documentaries at the moment. There's one very near completion and another one in the works. Malcolm will be down in the office with us tomorrow and Wednesday, and he's taking a camera away and so on to do more filming. So Malcolm's busy in the background, but we'll see the fruits of his labours in the not too distant future.
Plus we've some other announcements which will come up in the following days, which I think you're going to be quite excited about. And I'll also just say that there were a number of individuals that contacted me over the holiday period. It's really a sample of what's going on in Britain. So people who were worried about losing their houses, people who had lost children, people who were having trouble with the police. More and more of these calls are coming forward as we see the deliberate destabilising of the country. So what can we do about it? Get talking, get warning people. Don't get worried if they don't listen to you. Move on to the next person. But we need more counsellors like the gentleman from Seven Sisters to stand up and be counted. Thanks for joining us. Back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.